There's a sign back there that says Doge actually means dangerous oligarchs grab everything. Well, ain't that the truth? I am so tired of these billionaire boys and their grubby little hands grabbing at everything. Hands off our bodies, hands off our data, hands off our tax refunds, hands off our social security checks, hands off our constitution, hands off our democracy, hands off. As a proud member of the Committee on Oversight, I'm here for some real-time congressional oversight. And you are a beautiful sight to see, and you prove that the power of the people has always been greater than the people in power.
What you just watched is nothing short of a clarion call in the truest sense of the American democratic tradition, and I need you to understand right now, before we go any further, that what Representative Ayanna Pressley articulated from that stage is not hyperbole, not partisan theater, not the kind of overwrought political performance that cynics love to dismiss, because embedded in every single syllable of her righteous fury is a recognition that an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy. This is not some abstract theoretical concern debated in faculty lounges, but rather the lived reality of millions of Americans whose bodies, their data, their tax refunds, their social security checks, their very constitutional rights are under direct assault by a cabal of unelected billionaire technocrats who have essentially purchased their way into the halls of power and are now systematically dismantling the infrastructure of democratic governance piece by piece while wrapping themselves in the language of efficiency and innovation. The sign she referenced, the one declaring that Doge actually means dangerous oligarchs grab everything, is not just a clever protest slogan, but a devastatingly accurate diagnosis of what we are witnessing in real time, because Doge cuts to foreign aid programs had led to some 300,000 deaths by May 2025, with the estimated number exceeding 661,000 by December 2025. And this is not efficiency, this is not waste reduction, this is calculated cruelty on a genocidal scale that exposes the fundamentally sociopathic logic of billionaire governance, where human lives become mere line items to be slashed in service of an ideological project that values abstract notions of fiscal discipline over the breathing, struggling, hoping bodies of actual people. And here is what makes Pressley's intervention so absolutely crucial in this moment of American democratic crisis. She is naming with precision and moral clarity what the mainstream political establishment has been too cowardly or too compromised to articulate, which is that Elon Musk has begun funding GOP House and Senate campaigns for the 2026 midterms, firmly back in the GOP's camp after his messy breakup with Trump earlier this year, creating a perpetual motion machine of oligarchic power, where billionaires fund campaigns that put politicians in office, who then empower those same billionaires to dismantle the regulatory apparatus and redistribute resources upward in an endless cycle of wealth concentration and democratic erosion. When Pressley thunders hands off our bodies, hands off our data, hands off our tax refunds, hands off our social security checks, hands off our constitution, hands off our democracy, she is cataloging with prosecutorial precision the specific domains of American life that are under direct attack. And let me tell you what is happening to Social Security right now, because Doge announced plans to cut Social Security staff by 7,000 workers, 12% of the workforce, while the Trump administration also plans to shutter or shrink dozens of Social Security Administration offices around the country, with the Social Security Administration staffing now reduced to a 60-year low and baby boomers swelling the number of active beneficiaries to an all-time high. More people today now die waiting in line for their initial disability determination than at any time since 1956. So when Trump and his billionaire puppeteers claim they are not touching Social Security, they are technically correct in the narrowest possible sense, because they are not cutting benefits directly, they are simply making it functionally impossible for people to access those benefits by destroying the administrative capacity to deliver them, which is the kind of sadistic bureaucratic violence that allows them to maintain plausible deniability while watching elderly Americans and disabled people suffer and die. But wait, because it gets so much worse and you need to hear this bombshell. Under pressure from Doge, the Social Security Administration falsely marked more than 6,000 immigrants as dead in their records. Labeling a person this way nullifies their Social Security number, cutting off government benefits such as Medicare, and blocking their ability to work, bank, or use credit cards. a move which a former SSA commissioner described as tantamount to financial murder, and then more than 10 million new people have been marked as dead since early March, including many seniors who are very much alive, such as 82-year-old Seattle resident Ned Johnson, whose retirement benefits were cut off, thousands of dollars taken out of his bank account, and his Medicare cut off, which reveals the staggering incompetence and malicious indifference that characterizes this entire oligarchic project, because these are not data entry errors, these are the predictable consequences of putting young coders without government experience in charge of systems that determine whether millions of vulnerable Americans can eat and receive medical care and maintain the basic dignities of existence. The cruelty is not incidental to the project, the cruelty is the project, because the point is to make government so dysfunctional, so cruel, so unresponsive to human need, that the American people lose faith in the very possibility of collective action and democratic governance, and instead accept as natural and inevitable the rule of those who have accumulated the most capital. Now I want you to understand the historical stakes of this moment, because what Pressley is confronting is an existential threat to democracy, 8 decades after working people helped defeat fascism in 1945, one that comes from internationally networked far-right billionaires, 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 far-right billionaires. Trump's cabinet contains the highest number of billionaires ever in the history of the U.S. government, having made no apology for inviting the world's richest men into his inner circle, with the plan to work directly with them in designing a radically new autocratic libertarian political project. When Pressley calls out Elon Musk specifically, when she invokes his name with the kind of moral outrage that our sanitized political discourse typically forbids, she is refusing to treat as normal or acceptable what is fundamentally an illegitimate seizure of democratic power, because Elon Musk became the largest individual donor of the 2024 election cycle, spending more than $290 million in campaign contributions, essentially purchasing not just influence but operational control over federal agencies. It is an anticlimactic end to a period of rash destruction engineered by the world's richest man, who was handed the keys to the U.S. government to play with at his pleasure. And here is where the government shutdown that just ended becomes absolutely critical to understanding the larger oligarchic strategy at play. From October 1, 2025 to November 12, 2025, the federal government was in a shutdown as Congress failed to pass appropriations legislation, lasting 43 days and becoming the longest government shutdown in U.S. history, and the Trump administration terminated 17,000 federal employees through the RIF process in 2025, including 4,000 RIFs during the shutdown, which were blocked by a federal court, as part of using RIFs to reduce the federal workforce by nearly 250,000 workers over the past 10 months. And the truly chilling part is that President Trump explicitly described the shutdown RIFs as directed at Democrat programs, which reveals with stunning clarity that this is not about efficiency or waste reduction, but about using the power of the state to punish political opponents and dismantle programs that serve constituencies who did not vote for Trump, which is precisely the kind of authoritarian power consolidation that characterizes oligarchic regimes around the world. When Pressley declares that we are in an unprecedented moment, a constitutional crisis, she is not being dramatic, she is being descriptive, because what we are watching is concentrated wealth that doesn't need conspiracy to dismantle democracy, but just time, as the ultra-wealthy have learned to bend democratic institutions, not through revolution or coups, but through slow but determined erosion. Let me hit you with another revelation that exposes the fundamental rot at the heart of Doge's supposed efficiency mission. By its own stated metrics of slashing spending and waste, Doge was an utter failure, as when Elon Musk was first tapped to lead, he pledged to cut $2 trillion in federal expenditures, then before Trump even took office, cut his ambitions to $1 trillion, then after a few months downsized the promise to about $150 billion. When Doge said it had saved America $52.8 billion by terminating government contracts, Politico could only verify $32.7 billion in actual claimed cancelled contracts, for a total savings of just $1.4 billion. Which means that the entire rationale for giving an unelected billionaire unprecedented access to sensitive government databases and operational control over federal agencies has been exposed as fraudulent, yet the damage continues unabated, because the actual goal was never fiscal efficiency, but rather the systematic destruction of the administrative state's capacity to regulate corporate power and redistribute resources to those who need them most. This is precisely what thinkers like Thomas Piketty have been warning about when they describe how when the rate of return on capital exceeds the economic growth rate, wealth will become more and more concentrated in the hands of the few, creating a self-reinforcing cycle where economic inequality translates directly into political inequality, which then further entrenches economic inequality in a death spiral for democratic governance. When Pressley says the power of the people has always been greater than the people in power, she is invoking a tradition of democratic resistance that runs from Seneca Falls through Selma to Standing Rock, a tradition that recognizes that concentrated power does not voluntarily relinquish itself, but must be confronted and dismantled through collective action and sustained popular mobilization. And here is what makes the current moment so precarious and so pregnant with possibility. The system that made millions for a South African segregationist by the name of Elon Musk produced the world's richest white supremacist, a Nazi Nepo baby. And when Pressley makes this connection explicit, when she traces the through line from apartheid South Africa to oligarchic America, she is performing the kind of anti-racist class analysis that terrifies the ruling class, because it reveals how systems of racial domination and economic exploitation are not separate phenomena, but interlocking structures of oppression that require interlocking strategies of resistance. The fact that Musk's wealth was only about $100 billion when Biden was elected in 2020, but has skyrocketed to $450 billion since then, more than doubling during the past 4 years. While millions of Americans struggled with inflation and stagnant wages and crumbling public services, exposes the obscene reality that even under a Democratic administration, committed rhetorically to reducing inequality, the structural forces driving wealth concentration continued unabated, which tells us that incremental reform within the existing framework is insufficient to confront the scale of the oligarchic threat. And you need to hear what happened during that 43-day shutdown, because it reveals everything about the Republican strategy of manufactured crisis and deliberate sabotage. By October 17th, federal workers missed their first full paycheck of the shutdown, with approximately 750,000 workers furloughed daily without pay, while 1.4 million essential workers continued working without paychecks, and by October 31st, the Congressional Budget Office estimated the shutdown had caused $7 billion loss of output from the economy, inflicting immense suffering on federal workers and the communities that depend on government services, while Republicans blamed Democrats for refusing to pass a funding bill that would have gutted healthcare subsidies for millions of low-income Americans. The bill did not extend health insurance subsidies under the Affordable Care Act, which benefits more than 22 million low-income Americans, with tax credits due to expire on December 31st, and Republicans refused to include those protections in the funding bill, demanding instead that Democrats trust them to hold a vote later, which is the kind of bad faith negotiating that has defined Republican governance for decades, as they hold hostage the basic functioning of government to extract concessions that harm the most vulnerable. Now I want to bring this back to Pressley's core insight about dangerous oligarchs grab everything, because what we are witnessing is not just corruption in the ordinary sense of politicians taking bribes or engaging in self-dealing, but rather what political scientists call state capture, where de facto political power in a society comes from the control of economic resources, and we now face an incoming U.S. administration staffed by billionaires, dedicated to using their control of government to further advance their personal financial interests, with the clear intention to use that control to defend and further advance their personal monetary interests in disregard of consequences for the well-being of Earth and society. This is why Pressley's call to resist in the courts, in Congress, in the streets, is not just stirring rhetoric but strategic necessity, because oligarchic power must be contested on every terrain simultaneously, through litigation that constrains the most egregious abuses, through legislative combat that forces Republicans to vote on the record against popular programs, and through mass mobilization that demonstrates the depth of popular opposition and raises the political cost of continuing down this authoritarian path. The historical record is crystal clear. Billionaire-backed far-right forces are fueling a backlash against women, migrants, LGBTQI+ people, and marginalized community, because the oligarchic project requires the construction of internal enemies and the cultivation of resentment against vulnerable populations to distract from the fundamental theft being perpetrated by the billionaire class. What makes Pressley such a powerful voice in this moment is her absolute refusal to treat oligarchy as normal or inevitable, or something to be accommodated through minor adjustments to the existing system, and when she led that crowd in chanting, "Hey, hey, ho, ho, Elon Musk has got to go," she was modeling the kind of confrontational politics that this crisis demands, the kind that names names and assigns responsibility and refuses the both sides equivocation that paralyzes so much contemporary political discourse. And the stakes could not be higher because Trump's highly transactional and unsubtle presidency taking power when private wealth and political power has been melded so thoroughly heeds well to a growing oligarchic structure, with signs to watch including government weaponizing antitrust and other laws to reward political friends and punish enemies, targeting independent or critical media, or trying to defund public nonprofit. And we are already seeing every single one of these warning signs manifest in real time as Trump and Musk consolidate power and purge dissent and construct a governing apparatus that serves the interests of capital accumulation rather than human flourishing. The connection to immigration policy that Pressley makes is absolutely crucial because by cutting USAID as one of its very first acts, Dog broadcast a message across the globe that certain lives don't matter as much as the white Christian American ones the Trump administration prefers, a way to score political points by sticking it to the unworthy global poor. And one review estimates that more than 635,000 people have already died due to USAID cuts, more than 2/3 of them children, which exposes how the cruelty at the heart of Trump-Musk governance operates simultaneously at every scale, from the intimate violence of falsely marking immigrants as dead in Social Security databases to the genocidal violence of cutting off food and medicine to entire populations in the global South. This is what Hannah Arendt called the banality of evil, the way that mass death and suffering gets rationalized through bureaucratic language and spreadsheet logic, except there is nothing banal about the conscious choice to let hundreds of thousands of children die in order to save money that could then be used to cut taxes for billionaires. That is a moral abomination of the highest order, and it demands our righteous fury and our sustained resistance. When Pressley invokes Seneca Falls at the end of her remarks, she is placing this struggle in the long arc of American democratic movements that have always had to fight against concentrated power and entrenched privilege, and what those movements teach us is that change comes not from appealing to the better angels of our oppressors, but from building power among the oppressed and making it more costly to maintain injustice than to concede to demands for justice. The women who gathered at Seneca Falls in 1848 did not ask permission to demand the vote. They declared it as their right and spent generations building the organizational capacity and political consciousness necessary to make that demand irresistible, and that is precisely the work that Pressley and the broader progressive movement must do now in confronting oligarchy. And make no mistake about the global dimensions of this struggle, billionaires' goal is clear: to shift power away from the people and entrench it permanently in the hands of a global oligarchy, which means this is not just an American problem, but a civilizational crisis that requires transnational solidarity and coordination among democratic movements around the world. Here is the final piece you need to understand about why the Doge assault on Social Security is so strategically significant for the oligarchic project. Administrative costs are less than 1% of Social Security spending, and since almost all Social Security spending goes towards benefits which are set by statute, gutting the agency won't save money for participants. The only way that slashing the number of workers will save large sums of money is by making it hard for people to access benefits they've earned. So this is about manufacturing a crisis that can then be used to justify further cuts and privatization, the classic shock doctrine playbook that Naomi Klein documented so brilliantly, where you deliberately break things and then use the brokenness as evidence that government doesn't work, and therefore we need to turn everything over to private markets. The fact that at least 23 Doge members made cuts at agencies regulating where they previously worked reveals the staggering conflicts of interest at the heart of this entire operation, with industry insiders given power to dismantle the regulatory frameworks that constrain their profit-seeking, which is not efficiency but regulatory capture of the most naked and brazen variety. So when you watch Representative Pressley scream hands off with every fiber of her being, understand that she is not just expressing frustration or performing anger for the cameras. She is channeling the collective rage and fear and determination of millions of Americans who understand viscerally that their survival depends on defending the institutions and programs and rights that make dignified life possible against the predations of billionaire oligarchs who view democracy itself as an obstacle to their accumulation of wealth and power. She is telling us that this is the fight of our lives, that opposition outworked, outorganized, and outlasted those in power until the apartheid regime came crashing down. And that same stamina and solidarity and strategic brilliance will be required to defeat the oligarchic forces that threaten American democracy today. The crowd erupts not because she is telling them what they want to hear, but because she is giving voice to what they already know in their bones, that the system is rigged, that democracy is under assault, that their bodies and their data and their social security checks and their constitution are all under attack by people who were never elected and who do not care about anything except their own enrichment and aggrandizement. This is a call to action, a summons to the kind of sustained grassroots organizing and disruptive protest and electoral mobilization that has always been the only real check on concentrated power, because as Pressley says and as history teaches, the power of the people has always been greater than the people in power, but only when the people recognize their power and organize themselves to exercise it collectively against their oppressors. The oligarchs have shown us who they are. Now we must show them who we are. Hands off everything. Hands off democracy itself. This is our Seneca Falls moment, our Selma moment, our Standing Rock moment, and we will meet it with organizing, with mobilizing, with resistance in the courts and in Congress and in the streets, until we have reclaimed our democracy from the billionaire class that seeks to destroy it.